What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the close range meta for Season 4 Reloaded. This video should be much quicker than yesterday's very complex video that I made for the long range meta. That'll be linked below if you want to check it out. I did some cool things in that where I was able to compare controller versus mouse and keyboard accuracies. And as I also talked about small map versus big map as far as which weapons are better on each different map. So today is much simpler. Close range tends to just be dominated by what has the fastest TTK, but we have a lot of options that are like within 25 milliseconds of each other on TTK. So the close range meta is actually in I think a really healthy spot. There's a couple standouts, and we will show that here in a second. But as always, if you guys appreciate the content, all the work that goes into making the website, making the apps, making YouTube videos, don't forget to like the video, drop a comment on the video, and subscribe. We are right at 250,000, almost about to cross that threshold. Usually about 50% of you aren't subscribed that are watching, so I just wanted to remind you guys of that. But let's jump into it and talk about the close range meta. All right, like I said in the intro, this is a lot simpler than the long range meta. So I've got what I think are the top 5 weapons to choose from for close range right now. We got the Superi 46, WSP-9, FJX Horus, Lach Shroud with conversion kit, and MCW with conversion kit. The BP50 with conversion kit is pretty good and normally would have been on here, but looking at the stats in comparison to the Superi, it's just kind of like worse in every way, except it has more damage per mag, which is nice. But it's just, I don't think it quite competes with the Superi. Most of these don't, to be honest. So let's start going through it. We've got it on 300 health, combination shot location, and we're including bullet travel time and open bolt delay, and the charge from 0 to 40 meters. So looking at this, the yellow line at the bottom is the MCW. You can see it has that 600 millisecond TTK, which matches the Lach Shroud in the first damage range, but it basically doubles the Lach Shroud with the conversion kit. So I've got these built out with attachments as well, like my recommended build for each, so the damage ranges are included in this. That's why it might look a little different than just base guns. So I wanted to get like a fair comparison, not just the base guns here. So Lach Shroud is the green line. It goes out to about 9 meters with how I have it built, and unfortunately that's kind of the only way I can see it being built. You have to use the barrel that reduces ADS time, because otherwise the ADS time on the Shroud with conversion kit is just awful. So that cuts down your damage range a lot, and you don't want to throw something like high grain on there because that's just going to make the recoil too uncontrollable. So I think this is about the best you can do with the Shroud, and it's pretty good. I mean, it's got the fastest TTK, that's 600 millisecond TTK. It's just a shorter damage range than the MCW. FJX Horus is the blue line that is just slightly above the Shroud and the MCW. It's at 610 milliseconds versus 600 for the Shroud and the MCW. And then out in the mid-range there, you can see that the Horus is a little slower than some of the other options, like even than the Shroud. Specifically from like 10 meters up to 14 meters, it's slower than everything, and that's an extremely common engagement distance for SMGs. So I think that kind of makes it look a little worse than some of these other options. Next up, we have the Superi 46 in red. Got a little slower time to kill at 630 milliseconds, so it's 30 milliseconds slower than the fastest ones, but it has significant damage range out to 14 meters, 13.87 meters for its first drop off, which covers probably like 60% of your close range engagements. And then even past that, you can see the red line has really good time to kill all the way out. Has really good bullet velocity as well. It's just it's one of those guns where I always say that, you know, TTK is king up close, and it is, but 30 milliseconds can be overcome by other stats, and the Superi just has such good stats everywhere else. Crazy good movement speed, crazy good ADS movement speed, really easy recoil. It's just across the board, it is pretty much by far the best besides TTK, and the TTK is pretty close and then also has really good damage range. So that's why it's kind of been the meta for a while now. The orange is the WSP-9, which I still think is fantastic and does not get the respect it deserves. So it looks slower TTK than these other options. That's because we're including the open bolt delay. If you don't know what open bolt delay is, that's just some weapons in real life have a trigger delay from when you pull the trigger to the bullet actually being fired, and they try to mimic that in game. So the WSP-9 has a slight open bolt delay where when you pull the trigger, it's not going to fire right away, whereas the rest of these weapons don't have that. So if I turn off open bolt delay, you're going to see that this updates, and now all of a sudden the WSP-9 matches that 600 millisecond TTK on the dot of the fastest options, the Shroud and the MCW. So in situations where open bolt delay doesn't matter, where like they don't see you and you're just shooting at them, situations where it does matter, I think, is when you both see each other at exactly the same time, you both fire at the exact same time. Obviously that extra 30-40 milliseconds that's included from open bolt delay needs to be included there, because it literally would just be included in the time to kill in the actual scenario. But there's other scenarios where it's a team fight and you're popping between targets, things like that, where it doesn't really matter if there's an open bolt delay or not. So having the full 30 milliseconds in here is not really doing the weapon, or not really showing the weapon's true potential in all scenarios. So somewhere in between the two is kind of where it would lie. So like 6:15 on average, something like that. And then if you include sprint to fire as well, this is another thing that we do a lot with close range guns, is include sprint to fire or ADS time. So if you're sprinting into a building and you have to fire, then obviously you have to include sprint to fire in the amount of time it would take to kill a target. So if we include sprint to fire, you're going to see all of a sudden the WSP is by far the fastest time to kill of any of these, down at 664 milliseconds. So just quite a bit better than everything else. The next fastest is 32 milliseconds slower, and it has really long damage range out to that 13.8 meters there. So I think it's a slept on weapon. I think it's very, very good. Everyone's using the Superi, which I do agree is probably a little bit better. But there are plenty of scenarios where the WSP is actually going to win. And this is one of those scenarios. I'm including sprint to fire time, and maybe it's a team fight, so you shot a different target and it wasn't like you weren't like shooting each other at the exact same time kind of thing. So I think it's a great gun. I think it's slept on a little bit. But overall, I do think the Superi is probably the best. So if I had to rank these, I would say Superi in first, Superi, I don't know how to say it. WSP-9 in second, very, very close. Like, I think that it's much more competitive than people are giving it credit for. I think I would, I'm split between the Horus and the MCW for third. I think I'm going to give it to the MCW. Just because it has such long damage range and that 600 millisecond time to kill. I think that's pretty powerful. Now, like this graph shows, when I'm including sprint to fire time, it's going to be slower than the other options because it is an AR. Even though we built it for absolute minimum sprint to fire time, it's going to be a little bit slower. But that damage range and 600 millisecond TTK all the way out to 16 meters, which is quite a bit further than these other options, that's really powerful and really will help the weapon win a lot of fights. And then I'm going to give the Shroud the 5th place because it's just really slow. The reload time is terrible. You got to sacrifice damage range to get that ADS time reasonable. It just, on paper, the TTK looks good, but making the weapon actually work well is really, really difficult. So I'm going to give it 5th place here. Moving on to some recommended builds now. We're going to go in reverse order. So we're going to start with the 5th best, the Lachman Shroud. This thing is just really slow. It's just really tough to build to a level that it can actually compete in terms of the rest of the stats. Obviously, it has phenomenal TTK. So trying to counter that, we are going to use the Dark Star barrel. Like I said, this kills our damage range and bullet velocity, unfortunately, but 35% ADS time. Our ADS is already not good. It's at 259 milliseconds, so we really need this to reduce that ADS time down to something manageable. And along those lines, the magazines are very slow, so it already has a slow reload time without a mag, and then this increases, the 40-round mag increases by 10%, the 50-round increases it by 20%, and also just kills your movement and ADS time and everything. So, I mean, you really want to use the 40. If you have to use the 50, go to it, but the 40 just basically cuts all of the penalties in half compared to the 50, so it's kind of worth considering that. It's really tough to get the stats down to where they're manageable for this. So we're going to use the DR6 hand stop. That just has awesome stats for close range weapons as usual. And then last up, we're going to use the 1 milliwatt quick fire laser. There's just not a lot of attachments that I would want to put on this. It's already suppressed, so we don't need a suppressor. It's a decent weapon, but it's just really slow. And we did our best to get that down. It is pretty fast now, 163 millisecond ADS time. But the bullet velocity is awful at 334 meters per second. Sprint to fire is still not fantastic at 100 milliseconds. It's an okay weapon, but I just think these other ones are a little bit more competitive. Onto the MCW. This is obviously an AR, so we have to use the Jack Raven conversion kit. Turns it into an SMG sniper support kind of weapon. This build that I've been using is the same that I've had for months at this point. This gun hasn't been touched in a long, long time. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use the Kimura Silent Shot Integral Suppressor. 20% penalty to range and bullet velocity, but we're making this an SMG, so we don't care about that as much. It's obviously still important, but we don't care about it as much. And we have to get the sprint to fire and ADS down because it has to be competitive with other SMGs. And this has 10% bonus to both of those, as well as movement speed, ADS movement speed. Just a really good attachment for turning this into an SMG, and it's an integrated suppressor, so you don't have to get a suppressor once you put that on there. Because this is an AR and we have to get those ADS sprint to fire times down, we're going to use the SL Razorhawk laser light. That just reduces that as much as possible. And then for the underbarrel, classic every time pretty much. DR6 hand stop just has amazing SMG properties. Last up, 40 round mag. That gives it a decent damage per mag. It's not great, but it's decent. And overall, I think this is a very competitive weapon. Like I said, I think it's third best behind the Superi and the WSP-9. And it just has crazy good damage range. So if you find yourself taking fights at 16 to 20 meters pretty often, based on how you play, this would be a really good option for you. On to the FJX Horus. This is a pretty competitive weapon. I like it. I think it's pretty good. This is what I use because I didn't have the Superi leveled the last few days, so it is pretty good. We're going to start with the Mantis Heavy Barrel or Martis Heavy Barrel. This helps with recoil a lot, hurts your ADS time and movement speed, but our ADS time is already fantastic, so we don't need to be too concerned with that. Magazine, we're just going to use the 48 round mag, get the damage per mag up a little bit. I felt like this kind of needed an optic, so we're going to throw on the Mark III reflector. We do have this new visualization tool on TGD where you can click this little guy and zoom it in on the optic and see the actual reticle and everything, so that's pretty cool. We're going to use the DR6 hand stop just because it's great, so it hurts your tack spread and hip fire, but helps with like everything else that you want for an SMG. Movement speed, ADS movement speed, ADS time, sprint to fire time. It's just a phenomenal attachment for an SMG. And then last up, I always like to be suppressed, as I mentioned repeatedly, so we're going to go with the Shadow Strike Suppressor S. Don't want to hurt the recoil too much, which is why we're not using the Sonic Suppressor, because that does hurt your recoil a little bit, just because this thing already has pretty difficult recoil. So I think this is a great SMG. I do think the next three we're going to talk about are a little bit better, but I do think the FJX Horus is a competitive option. In second place, the WSP-9. My build for this is kind of weird, probably pretty different than most people's builds, but man, this thing just feels incredible to me on controller. I loved this build. I love this weapon. I feel like it's just one of the best, and I think it's underused by the community currently. So we're going to start with the integrated suppressor barrel, the infiltrator barrel. Hurts your damage range and bullet velocity, but this already has really good damage range and bullet velocity. Gets your weapon suppressed and helps with recoil. It does have some bouncy recoil, so we're trying to reduce that a little bit there with that. 1 milliwatt quickfire laser. Again, there's just certain weapons that don't have a ton of attachments that really match up with the build that you're going for. So when that happens, you just kind of throw on the 1 milliwatt quickfire just because it helps ADS and has no penalties. It's not visible to the enemy, and it just helps your ADS time a little bit. I also like an optic on this. Even on controller, I felt like with an optic, it was just much easier to track my target. So I tend to use... if I can find it here, I tend to use the Mark III reflector. Yeah, this guy. So this is the blue dot with like no frame. It's a really clean optic, and that's one of my favorites for close range. No ADS penalty. I think it just fits in really well. And then we're going to throw on the SL skeletal underbarrel, and that helps with your vertical recoil and gun kick, which kind of makes it easier to see your target while you're shooting. And just helps with that vertical recoil, helps with your ADS and sprint to fire, and only has small penalty to horizontal recoil and hip fire and tack spread, which we're not going to be using with this anyway. And then last up, the magazine. This shoots so slow that the 40 round mag has plenty of damage per mag, hits really hard, hits like a truck. And I just think that this build is a little weird. It's a little different than some other people's builds, I think, but man, I absolutely love this gun. It just feels like, I don't know, it reminds me of like the Lapa maybe in WARZONE 1, which was also one of my favorite guns. Just really similar, slower fire rate, hard hitting SMG. Really like it. Last up here, we've got the Superi 46. I'm going to give you guys a few builds for this one because it is the best SMG across the board, and it just kind of, it even is the best at tack stance. So we're going to do a tack stance build for mouse and key players because I think tack stance is really good for mouse and key players. So we'll start with just the regular build with no tack stance. So this is just going to be a general purpose all around SMG. So I like to be suppressed, as I always say. Shadow Strike Suppressor. Barrel, we're going to do the Zulu OP3 light barrel. This thing's crazy. It hurts your tack spread, flinch, and hip fire, but gives you 14% ADS movement speed, which is just absolutely crazy. And this is not a hip fire or a tack stance build, so we literally don't care about those stats. For the stock, we're going to use the Rescue 9 stock. It hurts your flinch a little bit, but has huge benefits to movement, and then also helps your recoil quite a bit. So makes you pretty accurate with this guy. 40 round mag. Would be nice if we had more, but 40 is what we have. The fire rate's not super fast, so it's not terrible, but that is a smaller damage per mag than some of the other options. And then last up, the Phantom Grip with 20% sprint to fire and 9% ADS time. You're going to have really good ADS time, really good sprint to fire, crazy good movement, crazy good ADS movement, long damage range. It's just all around a fantastic weapon. It also has better bullet velocities than some of the other SMGs with this build. I just think it's kind of all-rounder the best right now, and I mean that's what we've seen with the last month or so of people using it. Before I move on to the tack stance build for the Superi, for those mouse and key boys, I want to do an ADS movement speed build. This is for mouse and key or controller. You can get absolutely insane ADS movement speed with this gun if you stack things the right way. So we are going to start with the barrel. We're going to use the same OP barrel, Zulu OP3, 14% ADS movement speed. Crazy movement speed buff there. For stock, we're going to use the Jack Cutthroat stock. This gives you 17% ADS movement speed. So already we have two attachments that are doing huge percentages. Just wild. And then last up, we're going to use the FTAC MSP98. This gives another 8% ADS movement and helps with your recoil a little bit. So between those, and then if you also get the perk, I can't remember what it's called. I'll go look it up right now. All right, the perk that I couldn't remember the name of is called Stalker. It's a perk 3 slot. It increases your strafe and aim down sight movement speed. So your strafe speed and your aim down sight movement speed are increased. I don't remember what the percentage is. I think JGod did a video on this at one point. It's probably like 5% or 10% or something. So another 5 or 10% on top of the insane ADS movement speed we already had. This thing is just absolutely wild when you're ADS strafing around. It's gonna break people's aim assist just strafing, which is crazy. I think it's probably one of the most fun builds in the game right now. All right, taking this ADS movement speed build into the firing range. This doesn't even have the perk because those perks are not active when you're in the firing range. So this would be another 5 or 10% faster in the actual game, and it's already just bonkers, man. You just strafe so fast with this build, and the recoil is completely fine. TTK is still good, damage range is still good, ADS, sprint to fire, everything's still good with the gun. It just has insane ADS movement speed. Last up now, we're going to do the tack stance build. So we're going to start with the barrel. We are going to use the Bore 99 short barrel. So this does 16% to our tack spread and helps with ADS time, sprint to fire time, movement speed, all that stuff. It does hurt your range and bullet velocity a little bit, but this already had pretty good range and bullet velocity, so we're not too concerned with that. You could swap the Shadow Strike Suppressor. Since this is a tack stance build, we don't care about recoil as much, to the Sonic Suppressor to get an extra 5% range, 13% bullet velocity, so we'll do that. I think that's probably a good trade there. Rear grip, we're going to use the X10 grip. This does 22% tack spread and hurts our recoil a little bit, but tack stance really is not affected much by recoil changes, so that's okay there. We're not too concerned with that. And then actually for the stock, we're still going to use the Jack Cutthroat. It hurts your tack spread by 8%, but the ADS movement speed is applied to tack stance movement speed as well. I did some research on that a while back and found that it is ADS movement speed that scales with your tack stance movement. So that 17% is worth it for an 8% hit to tack spread, and you'll see that with this build, the tack spread is still phenomenal. So let's take this into the firing range and I'll show you. All right, I've got that tack stance build in the firing range now. You can see that the tack spread cone is still really, really small, like literally not a bullet's missing at 10 meters, and then you can easily take someone out at 20 meters as well. And with the Jack Cutthroat, you have really good tack movement speed here. I would say this is really just for mouse and key players. I don't see a scenario where this is better than the ADS movement speed build that I showed for a controller player. But for a mouse and key player, you can kind of get that same ADS movement speed, but have the little bit extra forgiveness of not having to be totally perfect on every every shot like you do when you're ADS'd with this tack stance build. So I could see this being great for mouse and key players, but in general, if you're a controller player, you're definitely going to want to stick to the ADS movement build. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching the video. As always, the best way to support is a direct subscription through True Game Data. Even if you don't use the website that much, you can think of it like a Patreon. It just helps support us directly rather than having to rely on ad revenue or things like that. So appreciate you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to drop a like on the video, drop a comment on the video, and I'll see you in the next one.